Well, hello there. This is Saturday night, as you know, and it's time for our Sunday school class that we have on Saturday night. My name is Karen Clymer. I'm with Elgin First Assembly of God, Elgin, Oklahoma. That church is located at 921 3rd Street there in Elgin, Oklahoma. If you do not have a church home, we'd love to have you. Or if you're visiting, we'd love to have you. Come on by. We start Sunday school at 9:45. We have classes for all ages. Our pastor, Brother Larry Toma, will be preaching in the worship service. That will be at 10:45. So let's get right into our lesson now. God's covenant with Abraham. This is for September 3rd, 2023. Lesson number 1. And this unit is entitled Israelite History. All right, and most of our study text is going to be, actually it's going to be all in Genesis, but a number of different chapters that we will address. All right, our central truth is God still calls people to enter into covenant with Him. Yes, He does. Our key verse is Genesis chapter 15 and verse 6. Abram, which was later renamed Abraham, but Abram believed in the Lord, and He counted it to him for righteousness. Genesis 15:6 in the King James Version, and in the New Living Testament it reads like this: Abraham believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. That's New Living Testament. Okay, our learning objectives are this. We will examine how the covenant given to Abraham fits into God's overall plan to bless the nations by bringing salvation through His Son, Jesus Christ. And we will explore the lasting significance of God's repeated declaration of His promise to Abraham, as well as circumcision as a sign of the covenant. And lastly, we will examine our own faith, noting how that faith is demonstrated through acts of obedience. It's not enough just to say it, we have to live it out. So it's a privilege and honor to study the lesson and to be able to administer it tonight to you. And I trust those of you who have your Sunday school quarterlies there, you have read the lesson. But if not, well, you still have time to get that done. Introducing our lesson. People talk about a lot of things about when they're blessed. Ooh, I got blessed today. And it may be something like, well, I hit all the lights was on green. And but you don't feel blessed when you get to the red lights, and maybe you're really in a rush and you need to hurry and get where you're going. But I find out that those red lights, I've decided when we get there, the best thing I can do is just worship the Lord while I'm there. I can be praying for those around, or I can just be praying for our world. I can just be thanking the Lord for His goodness, His grace, and all of the many blessings that He does pour on us. I'm thankful for that blessing of salvation. I'm thankful for the peace and the quietness that the Lord gives us. And there's just many things to thank for the Lord for, the many blessings that He has. But those words said, these three words, I am blessed. And so, well, what are you talking about? How did you get blessed? People say, well, I got a new car. It was just exactly what I wanted. And then the other person may say, well, I tell you, my cancer is in remission. Well, that is a blessing. So there are many things to look at when the person says they're blessed. Some people feel like they're blessed because they got to park up to a close place and all. Well, there's many things that the Lord does in blessing and helps us. And so, but we're thankful, especially for the great blessing of salvation. That is a blessing, that's a promise, and it's a great blessing. But we have to activate it by accepting the Lord as our Savior. All right, so we've asked the Lord to help us tonight in teaching this lesson, and we just want to start that now. God has blessed us in many ways, and Genesis places these blessings in a perspective by reminding us of the perfect relationship people originally shared with God and how it was lost. Well, we know that story about Adam and Eve, and how in the Garden of Eden, one little thing to do, don't eat of this one tree. And somehow that's what the evil one came and tempted Eve and deceived her. Though she knew the truth, he sounded so sincere, and he dropped that lie in there and said, oh, God's he's just not leveling with you. The thing of it is, He knows that you'll be just like Him. He doesn't like that. She fell for it, and before it was all over with, Adam also, that as it said, he was not deceived. He did know the truth, and yet he just literally just did it. It was an act of rebellion. But anyway, God had a wonderful plan for us that we can be in covenant relationship with Him all the time. May we always do that and love the Lord and serve Him with all of our heart. So here we have God is always interested in relationship. He's always interested in restoration when we're away from Him. He doesn't, when someone misses the mark, when any of us miss the mark, He doesn't just say, that's it, you're done. You're done. That's not it. It's not like that at all. But He wants us to walk in obedience with Him. And you know why? Because that is what's going to bring blessing to us. And that's what He wants. He wants us to be in that relationship with Him, and someday we'll live with Him forever in heaven. That's what He has in mind. He wants every one of us to live there. He doesn't want anybody to be lost. So it's an important thing that we realize that and just think about that. You know, He could just say, oh, well, all these people, it doesn't matter. Oh, so what? I've already had this plan, and I sent my son to die on the cross, raised him from the dead, and so if they've rejected him, I'm done with him. It's not that way. He's reaching out, always reaching out to us, and may we be always reaching toward Him and honoring Him and reaching out to others. So part 1 is called Called of God, Covenant Instituted. Abraham's calling. Now when you think about this, when the Lord called him out and spoke to him. Now remember, this man is he's heathen. He doesn't know God, didn't know there is the one true God, doesn't know that at all. And so here he is when the Lord calls him and he's to leave, he gets up and he leaves everything. He doesn't know where he's going, but there was something about when the Lord spoke to him, it was so definite, so definitive, that he didn't have any question in his mind. There was not a doubt in his mind that whoever this was in authority. He realized that it wasn't just a human being. I believe that with all of my heart. He knew this was God. Though he might not have known the word God, he knew it was a supreme being, and it was the one true God. And he put his complete trust in that, and he focused on pleasing God. And our writer brings out that he focused in such a way that he put his future fully in God's hands and accepted this challenge. And it was a huge challenge for him to do what he did, to get up and leave. Can you imagine when he told his father, when he told his family? And so he was going to get up and he was going to relocate, and he had to have a lot of faith. And he did. He really believed it was so much that he did. He was ready to go. So Abraham it mentioned in our lesson that he was originally called Abram, and in the Bible you will see that, but God's changed his name. The son of a man named Terah of Abram. This is who he was. Abram was called at this time the son of a man named Terah. Abraham lived in Ur, a prosperous city in southern Mesopotamia, located about 120 miles west of modern-day Basra, Iraq. So that kind of puts it in perspective right there, near Iraq, and we could point that out on our map here. Let's see, I should see that immediately, but somehow I'm not, and Iraq right here. All right, and then we're going to talk about here in southern Mesopotamia, located about 120 miles west of modern-day Basra, Iraq. So there again, we're still talking about Iraq there. And he sought to move his family toward Canaan, but instead he settled in Haran, a city of what is now southeast Turkey. So here we have Turkey. It is right there. And he moved his family to Canaan. What he wanted to do, he sought to move his family to Canaan, but instead he settled in Haran, a city in what is now southeast Turkey that was about a month's journey from Ur. Haran was a popular stopping point for travelers and caravans. All right, so another critical detail we want to mention here is that Abraham and Sarah were childless. And now here is this, our next part of our lesson is God's covenant with Abraham. And so here God, the word covenant, let's talk about that. It's familiar in Christianity. And when you talk about covenants, I recently got a bookmark, and I really appreciate it. It had some of the names of God in the Old Testament. And Yahweh here is mentioned here. Yahweh is Israel's covenantal God. Israel's covenantal God, a covenant. And said at its root, it refers to a treaty, agreement, or promise. And in Bible times, normally when there was a covenant made, it took place between a ruler and those that were their subordinates. But in this case, it is God who is the caretaker of this covenant, and its existence and administration depends solely on Him. You know, God is in charge of this. So wonderful. Vicki, good to see you on tonight. You be blessed right up there wherever you are. And I know you're a long ways from home, what we call home. We miss you. Love to have you back. So here are these commands that are given. We have a responsibility. They had a responsibility to listen to this. Abraham would complete the migration to Canaan, but he would do so alone. He'd be out into an unknown land with only his wife and his nephew. He was separated from support and care of his extended family. I mean, what this man did was just literally, it's unbelievable he would do this. But I believe with all his heart, it was so strong when the Lord called him. He knew, and he went, I really believe, almost without a fear. He knew. He trusted the Lord, and here he went. He was wanting to, so there's a key word of blessing in Genesis 12, 1 through 5, this word blessing. There's a lot of variations of blessings, of which they occur a number of times in the verses 2 and 3. It reminds us of God's blessing on humanity and human beings. Being would be restored through this one man, Abraham. And the thing of it is, this promise that he was being given and all, a lot of it would be fulfilled even after he was gone. But this man was needed, and he was so. Here was a world that had been cursed by one man, you know, like an Adam, and then to think that then now here it was this one man the Lord is depending on. It's Abram, and Abram later renamed Abraham. It's a pivotal moment for humanity. It takes us back to that time in the fall, as we've mentioned. So, Abraham's calling included a sevenfold promise, and I love this. When you listen to this now, Abraham included a sevenfold promise, and it went like this. Number one was, I will make you into a great nation. You know, and he doesn't understand how that's going to be because he and his wife are childless, and they're on up in years. And then, secondly, the Lord said, I will bless you. How many wants to be blessed? We all want to be blessed, and especially blessed by God. Number 3, he said, I will make you famous. Or I will make you, in the King James it says, I will make your name great. And he said, number 4, you will be a blessing to others. Abraham's getting, earful. I will bless those who bless you. And he said, and that was 5. Number 6, I will curse those who treat you with contempt, or those who curse you. Number 7, all the families on earth will be blessed through you. Can you imagine what that was like to hear that? And our writer brings out that where it says here, I will make you famous, or I will make you great, it means more than just a superficial fame. But said in the ancient Near East, a person's name was more than just an identification label. It spoke to one's character, how he or she was esteemed and regarded in the world. And so Abraham's calling included both his identity in the world and his impact on the world. So, it was something when you hear, today, even when we hear the name Abraham, when we're studying in the Bible about, you hear about Abraham, it's just touching us. And really, when you think about it, Abraham, because you immediately think of how great he was and what all that he did. It was something, how that the Lord guided him and directed him, and so you think of how he was known as the friend of God. I think of that. He's known as the friend of God. So anytime you think of his name, really the first thing we think of, I think, is his faithfulness, and that he would be willing to lead. Here he was, an idol worshiper. He didn't know God, but when he heard from God, he recognized, I really believe, he might not have known how to call him, what to call him, but he recognized this is God, the one true God. It was at least, and as the more he walked with the Lord, it became very apparent that who the Lord was, and that's what he was so different from anyone. I think after that encounter with the Lord, and now he's having a relationship with the Lord as he's listening to the Lord, he didn't want to miss it. Now you think when the Lord is calling you out to go to this other country, you don't know the way, so what you're going to listen to him. It was so definite to him what he had heard. He was listening to what the Lord was going to say to him, how the Lord was going to guide him. And that's exactly what happened. And you think of now how and even today, and how many people look back and they say, and you know, us even today, we can really say that Abraham, we're in a way, we're Abraham's descendants. You know, there's so many descendants of Abraham, and he told him that he said there'll be more than even the stars, and the stars are just absolutely, we would think countless. There would even be more than that, and he's telling him that when he and his wife are way up in years. She's well past the childbearing time, but the Lord said, and he lets him know, before it's all over with, he lets him know that you are going to have children. You're going to, well, Abraham, you know, he was thinking, I've got to go here and I've got to get, you know, here's my trusted servant I have, and he's be the one that he's going to kind of be like my son. Oh, the Lord said, no, that's not what I had in mind, but it's not going to happen that way. The calling is confirmed by a covenant. Abraham had this vision. He had a wonderful twofold and divine encounter in which God reaffirms his presence and blessings to Abraham. And this, it reminds us that God will always fulfill his promises. This was so significant and so huge, and that God was so gracious to come to him in a vision, and he can minister to him. And let's listen to what the Lord has to say to him about God's powerful covenant promise to Abraham. There are key things. He said, I am. These I am statements. Who is he? You know, I am that I am. He said, I am thy shield. I am thy shield. I'm telling you, that is something. He was saying, I am the one that will protect you. This man needed protection. He needed help. Rowena, delighted to see you on too. So you think of that. He's leaving. He has no idea. This is so different. He's never done anything like this. And he's leaving, and the Lord gives him this vision. And he said, I am your shield. I am the one who protects you. I am the Lord. Literally, I am the one true sovereign God. Can you hear maybe Abram thinking, I knew it, I knew it, I knew it. He had sensed it. He knew it. Pamela, glad to have you on. The explanations of the covenant promise are built on the foundation of God's nature and character. You know, there's sometimes people make promises, and we may be involved in some kind of an agreement, and something comes up, we simply cannot fulfill it. We simply cannot fulfill it. God's never that way. He never said, well, I was depending on this one to do this, and they didn't. And so I'm going to have to back out of what I said. It never happens that way. No way. God, what he says is going to happen. And in verse 1, how God had reminded Abraham of the promise he had originally given him about 10 years earlier. Well, Abraham wasn't questioning God's plan or character, but instead he was simply just wondering, you know, as old as we are, and, as Sarah's well past childbearing, he just couldn't. He said, what I need to do probably is get Eliezer here of Damascus to fill that position of heir. But God said, no, that's not going to be necessary. He said, the number of your natural descendants will dwarf the number of the stars overhead. Can you imagine hearing that? You know, when we look at it now, all these centuries later, and we are, you think, well, we know all these things. You know, we have all the Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament. He didn't have that. He didn't have that. I mean, and how that, but it was just impossible. It was like humanly impossible. It wasn't going to happen. But yet the Bible said that Abraham believed God. He believed God, and so I like here the writer brings out that he didn't just believe in the promises, but that Abraham focused on the promise giver, and he thought, well, this is God himself that's given me this promise. And he didn't really know. He was, just like I said, a heathen now. But now God was beginning to teach him through Abram here, and he believed. And he believed God. He's teaching him through the Lord. Rather, Abraham, he's listening as the Lord is teaching him. It doesn't say he simply believed, but he focused on the promise giver, holding a steadfast trust in him. I love that. May we do that. And talked about the sealing or confirmation of a covenant is described. And there was ways that they said, they mentioned here now, these things, of course, we don't do, but they would sacrifice in a normal treaty. Both parties would walk between the sacrificed animals, and that would demonstrate mutual commitment to the promise made. But it mentioned that specifically in this, Abraham's covenant, There was only a smoking firepot and a flaming torch, signifying God's presence passed through the animals, indicating that the promise rested on God alone. Had nothing to do with people. So they said treaties in the Near East, ancient Near East treaties often included blessings and curses based on whether the covenant was kept or broken. But while God's blessings, and here God is going to keep his promise. There's no doubt about it. There is no curse attached to failing to keep this covenant. God would uphold his promise, and no human being could thwart its completion or stand in the way of its fulfillment. It was God is going to do it. He's going to do what he said he would do. It would be fulfilled. This is the thing that's really something, is that the promise would be fulfilled long after Abraham's death. Imagine that. Most of this was going to happen after his death. All kinds of hardship are going to come into his lineage. Just think of how that they will include slavery in Egypt. You think about Joseph and all how they went, where they were in Egypt's bondage for all of those hundreds of years. Yet deliverance would come, and Abraham's descendants would fill the land as God had promised. Through them, the entire earth would be blessed. I mean, just imagine just think what God can do when people obey him, when people believe, when he speaks. May we be like this, like Abraham. You think, take us that we know, we've been in church and we've served the Lord, and there are people that may not go to church, but they're aware and they hear things. Now, I understand there are some people who live even in America who have never been to church, never heard of, don't know anything about it. But for the most part, people do. But to think that what a wonderful thing to know the Lord and to love him. Human nature makes it easy for people, even Christians, to focus on the negative. But thankfully, God has reminded us of his promises as we walk through life. We have to watch that. Don't you? Be careful about being around negative people that always see the bad. They never see the faithfulness of God, the goodness. Yeah, but they'll say, yeah, but but's disease is a dangerous disease. Yeah, but what about this? Yeah, but what about that? Well, you know what? God has a way of making all things work together for good to them that love the Lord, who are the called according to his purpose. His word declares that, and I believe that. So here is now Abram was his name, and now he's going to get a name change here. And God, once again, he reminds Abraham of his promise in the form of this name change. Remember right now, he said, like your name here, it's Abram. And, well, he said, see, it's fixing to get a change here. Let's talk about the name. Abram means exalted father, said possibly a reference to Terah or to God. But the name Abraham means father of a multitude. Father of a multitude. He's going to do what he said he would do. So he and Sarah had struggled they couldn't reconcile. How do you reconcile God's promise with the reality of not having a son as they grew older? And they said, but God didn't desert him. He didn't desert him because what had happened, they actually, because Sarah thought, well, we've got to do something here. Right here, you just go into my handmaid. Well, so the child was born there, and God didn't just cast him off and say, oh, I can't use you. Look what you've blown. You've blown the whole thing. The covenant is just over. It wasn't that. The covenant held true. God is going to be faithful. Abraham, he worshiped God, and he honored the Lord, and he believed God when the Lord spoke to him, and he affirmed to him, yes, you're going to have your own child. And remember that actually did happen. And it was just shocking to him, and we have to try to imagine what that was like. How could this be? It's totally impossible. Well, absolutely, it did happen. Right now we'll go back to this. The sign of the covenant is identified. While God initiates and fulfills the covenant promises, his people confirm his covenant through obedient response. God commanded Abraham to initiate a sign that would confirm that promise. What way was this? And here he is. He finds out what it's going to be, and so he's going to be faithful. He just going to honor God. That's what somehow he knew this was God was moving in a special way. The covenant included God's blessing as a promise on all the peoples of the world. God's seed would be the means through which this everlasting covenant would be brought forth and proclaimed. It would be a physical sign to accompany his covenant with his people, circumcision. That was the sign that was significant for a number of reasons. Talked about this And our writer brings out the permanent physical alteration would signify the everlasting nature of the covenant. It also served as a reminder of the unique calling from and relationship with God, as well as the people's obligation to walk before Him in holiness, which would later be established in the law. And I love this where he brings this out. And I was reading I have a bookmark that I was given. It has the names of God from the Old Testament. And Jehovah Mekadesh means the Lord who sanctifies you. And that's what he was talking here about. While we may think of holiness as purity and cleansing from sin, we cannot overlook the root meaning, which involves being set apart from the world by God for His purposes. And for New Testament believers, the sign of circumcision, what we're talking about is circumcision of our heart. You know, we're totally surrendered to the Lord. The Lord really brought this to me here several maybe months ago when I was praying about. I said, the Lord really, as I began to read those different names of God, and the one Jehovah Mekadesh, the Lord who sanctifies you. I want to be sanctified holy, pure, and clean. That I don't want anything to do with anything that's unrighteous and ungodly. I want to be faithful and honorable to the Lord, and that's what He's counting on us. He's counting on us, and I don't want to let Him down. And so it's important that we carefully walk before the Lord. I really believe at all times. Part 3 in our lesson, Abraham tested regarding the covenant. Now this was something. Here now they just so shocking. Abraham said God's promise comes alive in Isaac. When Isaac is born, and here Abraham is 100 years old, Sarah is 90, and so here, you know, she's laughed when word had come to them that she was going to have a child. That was just like a joke. Forget it. There's no way that was going to happen. Well, when that message was delivered to her, and they said, "You laughed." Oh, she said, "I did not laugh." Oh, yes, you did laugh. Well, said now. That laugh then was that this is impossible. I don't believe this. But now she laughed it was a laugh of just a joy and just a joyous laugh because the Lord, what He had done, it was an impossible situation, but yet they had their own child. And it was something how God had done that. But then, you know, they're just so happy, and it was so shocking of what the Lord had done. And, you know, Abraham and Sarah, no doubt, rejoicing. Look what the Lord has done. Look what the Lord has done. And what a testimony is that begin to resound through all the place. You know, it's like, that would be the biggest news if they'd had TV and internet and all like that. They'd have been everywhere. But the message spread. I'm sure it spread and said, think of this. How in the world could this be? Well, it was because God did. He did what can be considered the impossible. Because He's a promise keeper. He's a promise keeper. That's what He is. And I tell you, Abraham was victorious. Now, when it comes to a time, now this miracle child, they had this miracle child. And now comes the time. Now, and he's more than he's more than a baby. And when the Lord speaks to him, and He's to offer him up, go up and offer him as a sacrifice, you think, whoa. Now, and like our writer brings out, that seems like you wonder what this story, it just, you don't really it's very, very peculiar. As our writer brings it out, it's a very peculiar account. But he was told to sacrifice this miracle child on a burning altar. And it tells how we're not told really God's intentions, but God told him to do it. And you know what, Abraham, he was going to honor, he was going to be faithful to the Lord. It was yes, Lord, yes. And the question is, did he tell Sarah? And you know, most of us, I think, would think he didn't dare tell Sarah. Well, I don't. We don't know. The lesson, in fact, the Bible does not tell us if Sarah knew. But they left out that day when the sacrifice of Isaac was halted. Though, see, there he went. He was going up that mountain, but he said, "My son, now we're going to go up to the mountain and we're going to worship." And he said it's about when they returned. So it is thought that he actually truly did believe he was going to have to offer his son up, but he had faith in God that God would raise that son up because he was the miracle child. He really believed that God would, but this would be the child that the Lord had given to him, and this was the seed he would have, that they would begin to have more and more children. But because you have obeyed, he said, I will certainly bless you. God's promised blessing was never in doubt. In His omniscience, God knew Abraham's faith. true faith is more than mental assent. He knew Abraham. He knew Abraham. He knew that Abraham, all that he had totally surrendered to do whatever the Lord wanted. When he had him to leave, all along he's being faithful. Now we know they missed it. They said when he thought, or his wife thought, well, really, we need another child. Well, what did they do? And I wrote a note on that. I didn't read it. That said, when they had the child, the other child, when that child was born, literally, it actually complicated their life tremendously. Never should that child have been born, and it caused all kinds of issues. And even today, those descendants are. But still, the Lord didn't cast him off, and so he did tell him how that he would also bless that child. The fear of God might be described as recognizing that he holds life and death in his hands and living accordingly, because we know that we believe that. Abraham shows us that obedience is inseparable from true faith. Yes, he does. He was known as the friend of God, the friend of God. We think of the time when they were, the angels, how they were being sent, and there was going to, and where Lot had already, his nephew was in danger, because it was going to be an awful time when fire and brimstone was going to come down on some cities, and he could be in danger. How that this man, he stood and prayed and sought God. And God, because he was a friend of God, he listened to him. I tell you what, I want to be the friend of God. So Abraham shows us that obedience is inseparable from true faith. It's one thing to say it, but it's one thing to carry through. When the Lord tells you to pick up and leave, to do that and see God work. I remember one man telling us how that when he had a nephew the Lord had called to preach, and he was afraid to leave his job, and he was afraid that he couldn't make it, and his family wouldn't be able to provide for his family. And his uncle, who had been a pastor for years, he was telling him, he said, well, I tell you what, if the Lord fails you and you can't pay your bills and you can't feed your family, let me know and I'll come help you out. It was just a joke. But, God did bless, and I heard that nephew say what a blessing, how God had blessed him and helped him. And this, just casting yourself on him and doing. Now, if you go out on your own and do something, that's a different thing. But when God has sent you, when God has spoken, it will work. God will work with us. All right, what is God saying to us? And like that faith and works are inseparable, which we just touched on. The life of faith is a relationship and ongoing interaction between God and his children. So this week, let's examine our life and ensure that our faith and works are aligned. Do we say one thing and do another? Well, I know, but I know, I don't think God will ever call me to do this or that. Let's don't go that route. Let's just say, Lord, whatever you need me to do and want me to do, Lord, I'm yours. I will do whatever you want me to do with joy and gladness. I may not always understand, but Lord, I want to be faithful. I'm never going to tell you no. It was not acceptable in my home, what I grew up in, that you would tell your parents no. That was a very serious offense. Don't do that. You get in trouble. Ministry in action. We're going to live out our faith, invite others to share how God's promises have helped when their faith was challenged. And we can tell of times too when the Lord has helped when our faith was challenged and it looked so crazy, maybe what the Lord has spoken to us to do. And you have to be careful who you talk to at those times, because you can have some people that have you so confused and all. Be careful who you talk to. You want to make sure you're talking to somebody that's faith-filled and trusts and believes in God. And God's not going to have you doing something crazy. He's just not going to do it. But when I just say, be very careful who you talk to and who you tell. If you want somebody that's filled with faith and is going to trust and believe with you, pray with you. Another thing is tell someone what God has done in your life and remind them we all can share each other's joys and burdens as we walk through this life of faith. There's nothing like a good testimony. Somebody maybe that they feel definitely the Lord is directing them to do something, and they want to please the Lord, but they're a little bit nervous. And if you have a testimony of a time that God has just reached out to you and met a very serious need, or maybe spoke to you to do something and you didn't know what to do and how the Lord ministered to you, that is so helpful to them. I think we need to do that. Tell them and just say, yes, I'm praying for you at this time. God's going to be faithful to you. I'm praying and believing. Examine the ways you put your faith in action, asking God to help you minister to others as an act of worship to God and compassion for others. Yes. It's sometimes we may know something and we can see and we may not tell others, but we may be thinking critically of somebody that's not maybe living like they should. And have you had the Lord to quicken you and say, pray for them? Pray for them. That's important. That instead of looking and seeing what we see wrong, and what they're doing wrong, or what we think they're doing wrong, and what they ought to do, how about us pray? How about us pray and love them, pray and believe, and perhaps even come alongside them and pray and let them know that we're praying for them. We trust that you have been blessed and helped by the lesson. And next week is going to be Isaac blesses Jacob. But right now, we're talking about this brother right here, Abraham, and most of of his covenant is going to be fulfilled after his death. And just think about it, still happening, and God's still blessing. And we're so thankful for that. It says to me, keep on keeping on doing the right thing. You'll be blessed. Look forward to seeing you next time. You have a great, restful night, and hope you'll be in Sunday school and church tomorrow. Goodbye. Love you.